Good evening and welcome to the forum. I'm John Mattison. Tonight's show focuses on a theme relating to the local elections. They're only a month away, and so we talk to two political scientists about the road ahead. We look at coalitions and the state of our politics. My first guest is Dr. Ralph Mathegka. Ralph has a BA Honours MA from Wits University and a doctorate from the University of Johannesburg. Welcome, Ralph.
Thank you so much, John, and it's a pleasure to be talking to you.
You wrote a book called When Zuma Goes, and then you wrote Ramaphosa's Turn, and your new book is the ANC's last decade, how the decline of the party will transform South Africa. Ralph, why last decade?
Well, John, I'm taking off from looking at the ANC as a party that is following the path of other liberation parties in the region. And if you look at the theory that exists around liberation parties, is that most of them, beyond 30 years, they struggle to remain in power legitimately. They alter constitutions. They become quite unpopular. We have many examples of those happening. And of course, there are other liberations that people often point to in areas such as in Sweden, where they will say that it is still in power even today. But within the region, in a post-colonial Africa setting, the lifespan seems to be 30 years, and the ANC is entering that. It is in that last decade of that 30 years, and it's becoming quite a difficult decade for the ANC because we are seeing disintegration compounded during that time, during that period. Some of us, we tend to believe that the ANC can renew itself, come back. Some people believe that. My submission, John, is to say that, look, these things are structural. These things have got to do with the system. It's not just about one person leading the ANC. It is how democracy is evolving, how consolidation is evolving, how post-liberation parties that have found democracy are actually themselves struggling to transform themselves into modern political party leading complex society. So it's not just a simple question of saying they are going to run around the Messiah to turn things around. It is the natural evolution of these parties. The ANC has reached at that stage.
Well, I must say, when I look at the ANC's pitch in its manifesto for this election, it seems to be, we know we made mistakes and we'll do better next time. That's not a slogan that rings with excitement.
Exactly. I mean, it's a mea culpa. Where they are admitting things and they no longer have a latitude to go into the aggression. And, John, all of this thing says as well that the ANC does no longer shape the narratives in South Africa, but it reacts to the narratives in South Africa. It's no longer as hegemonic. So we need to be thinking about how will that affect the party at regions? I mean, you introduced your topic looking into local government. There's few of government that fascinate me a great deal because I'll tell you, John, in my view, I think that 50 years down the line, it wouldn't matter who's the president in this country, but it will matter who's the mayor of your town. Power is devolving to regions. That's how I see it.
Ah, that's very interesting. Part of their problem, the ANC's problem, is that it is in these two factions. CR7, you describe them as CR17, in other words, the Cyril Ramaphosa election faction in 2017, and RET, Radical Economic Transformation, that's linked to former President Jacob Zuma and Ace Magashule, the suspended Secretary General of the ANC. Is that a fight that just continues forever?
I think that the fight continues at some level, but I think that if you look at the totality, President Ramaphosa has won very important battles here. And when I wrote, my view was that he won the moral battle against the RET because the RETs were only gunning for political power. Their struggle, their whatever cause lacked that moral basis. While the president's cause is anchored on anti-corruption, he's gaining a lot of sympathy and empathy outside the ANC. I mean, look at what has happened. The ANC further delegitimized itself during the time of the protest in July. While the ANC was becoming weaker, President Ramaphosa is becoming stronger. It has always been my thinking that his strength depends a lot on the weakening of the ANC. A strong ANC is just not good for him. So he's finding the ANC he likes, a weaker one.
Well, it's very interesting because you're looking at the trends and you're asking at what point the ANC loses its 50% plus one and what happens then.
I mean, John, I'll tell you, the mandate has been gradually receding. I mean, the ANC has been losing the strength of the mandate. They're still holding up in certain rural areas, but if you look in urban areas, you look in other areas, some of the mining towns, some areas in Northwest and so forth, you find it that they're not as strong. And in some municipalities, I don't even want to talk about Western Cape. So actually, you know what? We seem to be thinking that one day there will be a huge event to celebrate that the ANC has crossed that 51%. In many areas, it has already done so. The ANC has failed to gain control of the metros that are economic hubs. So it's just that in our psyche, we're still waiting for the big drawing of the curtain where we're saying at national level, it has done that. But if you look, when it comes to the spread of power, when you look across the provinces, the majority it has in certain provinces, and you go to metros, you provide an analysis, it tells you that on aggregate, the ANC is almost there. In certain areas, it was already crossed that. But I think we will see further acceleration in this local government election, and the next general election. That's where I think at national level, a big message will most likely be sent as the party nudges further down below 60%.
Well, of course, the last local government elections in 2016, 5 years ago, were very interesting. The outcome, I think, was a big shock to the ANC because they lost, as you referred to, Johannesburg, Tshwane, and Nelson Mandela Bay. And of course, they'd lost Cape Town some time ago. Will they get any of those three back?
It is going to be very difficult, but to me, it will be a travesty if they get those three back. I mean, practically, I don't think they can pull it off. I mean, John, you can't go into the election without doing anything since the last election and expect for your votes to be rewarded with more votes. I mean, that will turn, my professor of politics used to say that will turn the politics upside down, where it will be sitting on its head. I mean, there has to be a sense of consequences, and logic dictates that where things are going, the NC cannot be rewarded. You see, this is the problem with these elections, whereby we don't see any political party that is consolidating because South Africa's politics is not allowing for any consolidation. One of the things I say in the book is fragmentation, no consolidation. We've entered in the era of fragmentation, multiple centers of power. So looking at it into this local government election, as we are saying, the NC will not grow. They will most likely lose votes on the margin, but it's still possible for the DA to also experience the same thing while the EFF experiences stagnation, while one or two small parties recycle votes on the margin. The general story is that there is no strong consolidation. There is rather a gradual, noticeable fragmentation of politics.
Before we go to the break, Ralph, I want to ask you, I mean, your understanding of your analysis of the ANC and its relationship with Cyril Ramaphosa is so interesting. And of course, corruption is the key, but corruption has so badly infected the ANC. Do you think he's making real progress? Is he cleaning up corruption in the ANC and in the state?
Oh, no, I think he is, but politically, he cannot call a press conference and say, I've done well within the ANC. I mean, you know, nobody wins an internal party battle by fighting corruption internally within the party. Those are things that cause rifts and problems. And we know the cost of the anti-corruption drive he has pursued in government. The costs are within the ANC. And again, John, this is where the game looks quite asymmetric. Whatever gains you get within the state institution, I mean, there are a lot of gains. SARS is no longer led by a commissioner who has credibility problems. The PIC, the National Prosecuting Agency, I can name many of them where I think anti-corruption and a drive towards good governance has done very well in government. But again, the cost is borne within the ANC. You see, he does well within the state. These are good things. Within the ANC, it makes his life difficult because political tensions become even more and more tense. And he needs the very same ANC to elect him. It is so divided to re-elect him at the next elective conference. What he brings in terms of stability in government result in instability within the ANC. But if he says that he's going to look the other way within the ANC, South Africans are going to stop believing what he's doing in government. So he's between a rock and a hard place. He's going to have to balance these two well. He cannot, it's not about pleasing people. I think he should be chasing a bigger legacy, because if it's about being popular, it's not part of this outcome.
I think what outsiders, we have just a few seconds left, but what outsiders look at and find disturbing is they bring in new cabinet members and people feel hope. And then it's someone like Dr. Mkhize at Health, or even the Justice Minister. Several, and even Gwede Mantashe at Mining and Energy. I'm going to ask you to respond to this when we come back, but just while we take a break, it just, you feel hopeful because you see people who seem to care about the right things. And then, of course, we get disappointed. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back in a moment with Dr. Ralph Mathegka. And we're back talking to Ralph Mathegka about his book, The ANC'S Last Decade, How the Decline of the Party Will Transform South Africa. Ralph, I was asking you before the break about the disappointment the public feel when they see good people coming into cabinet, or apparently good people, and then they get very disappointed.
I mean, John, it's about expectations. You see, the thing is that there is no group of people elsewhere in another planet that is being kept for safekeeping by the ANC, which will be deployed when there is the right time. There is no such. You're going to deploy within the ANC. You've got a mixed bag within the ANC. And if you start looking at it from the point of view of good or evil, you're not going to get anywhere, John. I think the best way is to look at who can you work with and who can you not work with. A lot of them, you no longer have people within the ANC that you can say are outright beyond reproach. Unfortunately, you're talking about Justice Minister, you're talking about Mr. Mantashe at the energy, with all the allegations coming out around the new power procurement. All of these things, Minister Bladens demanded, education, the allegations, all of these things, at some point, it is becoming sad when nations have to choose between stability and really good governance.
Right.
Because it is becoming unfortunate.
In your book, you raised another issue that I thought was very relevant, and I haven't seen other authors raise. You referred to the issue of title deeds. And it just seems so, it would be something so important in terms of service delivery to ANC voters to resolve the title deeds issue so people can freely buy and sell their own property. Can you just explain the dynamic there? Why hasn't it happened?
I mean, it's one of those issues that we never resolved in post-apartheid, how we are going to deal with traditional authorities and the land that is being owned under, or that is under the custodian of traditional leadership. I mean, John, I've come from one of the villages where I live under this thing. So what I'm writing about goes to my heart, because I live in a house that I don't really own in the true sense of a house that you can own and alienate the right to property, for example. So a lot of communities are in this area where I think this issue has not been resolved. So traditional authorities control access to the use of land. They grant the right to use. People install value that is even more than the value of the house, but they cannot alienate that because they've got no title deed. A local government, national government, a civilian government, the ANC-led government, they look the other way because they cannot confront the issue. Remember, John, the issue of Ingonyama Trust, the Motlanthe test report on that. So this issue is there, but what bothers me the most is that it goes beyond the title deed. It goes to private property and the economics of rural areas. How much do we know about it? And how much are we willing to get to understand? I mean, John, we should be quite unfortunate if we have real estate that is in the range of billion, but it's not part of the economic exchange in the country, just because we don't understand it. It's for me, it shows that gap in the post-apartheid policy, that those are things that the ANC should be attending to. Those are doable things.
What will it take for them to do it? Is it a question of feeling afraid of the traditional leaders' political power?
It is a question of legitimacy, and legitimacy has to do with political power, because if you lose political power, your legitimacy also declining at the same time, the legitimacy to make decisions, legitimacy to rule. Corruption eroding the ANC's legitimacy and come up with unpopular policies.
Oh.
That is what is creating the problem. I mean, you need to understand, John, one of the reasons why people don't want to pay e-tolling in Gauteng is not only just because it's unaffordable, but it's the legitimacy of government to collect revenue.
Right. Now, I want to move from that to an issue that I'm not sure what you think about exactly. You know, it's interesting to me that we incentivized the creation of the black middle class through black economic empowerment. On the other hand, we didn't incentivize to nearly the same extent that is effectively job creation. We could have done it the other way around. And of course, that would have spoken to the black working class or unemployed class. Isn't that a critical policy shift that needs to happen?
I think if there is anything, John, that we need to recognize in the mistake we have done, was to actually create a system whereby our economic policy is so much dependent on the ANC's transformation agenda. I mean, I'll tell you what I mean by that. This is where the challenge is, because if you really have an economic policy that looks into the well-being of the people, that knows that it has to increase production and the middle class will grow organically, you are not going to have to anchor it on a particular political agenda in the manner that we have seen this thing being anchored on the ANC's transformation agenda. The black economic empowerment. The black economic empowerment is the ANC's transformation agenda. But the big problem is that we are not allowed to even indulge in quizzing it and interrogating it. Does it hold in a modern complex society? Will it have distortions? What will actually happen?
But isn't it just transformation in terms of ownership, not in terms of job creation? So it's actually preferencing one class of black South Africans over another.
Exactly. And one of the things that people need to understand as well is that there is no capitalist class that just woke up being a capitalist class. It was through the process that have created value in the society. So you cannot just transfer a portfolio, John, and call it an economic progress. You just transfer a portfolio from one portfolio to another. This person is rich without any sensible economic activity coming out in a way that you can say there are multipliers in terms of job creation, in terms of skill, in affecting the middle class and so forth. So, but you see, the problem is that it's almost a taboo to raise these questions about BEE. At some point it used to be. I mean, during President Thabo Mbeki's term, people just had to live with it. It's just that now we're beginning to interrogate this thing deeply.
But isn't that the way to do it? In other words, you're not saying black South Africans shouldn't be preferenced, but you're saying the biggest problem is unemployment and the vast mass of unemployed people.
Exactly. I mean, if you can deal with unemployment, it will, once you deal with unemployment, even Thomas Piketty argued actually in his book, Capital, he argued very well, John, that the distribution of opportunities through wages are the most effective to change the social fabric of the society. What that means is that when you employ people, it is the best way to distribute opportunities through wages when you employ people. Unemployment is the biggest problem when it comes to changing the fabric of the society. Whatever you do, it will just look cosmetic. You are bringing the middle class, we are bringing the high earning top class without any group that is supporting them below. So that is where the problem is here.
So it should be a transformation agenda, but a transformation of that type.
It should be a transformation. First of all, it should not be held as sacrosanct, as if criticizing it is blasphemous. I mean, for a long time, that has been the attitude of the ANC when people are looking at Black economic empowerment. I mean, you cannot just do it that way, sending quotas to those who criticize and all. But now I think there is a willingness to evaluate and to say, maybe we got it wrong. Maybe we need to think about other. I mean, I think when people start talking about a broad-based, that is the first recognition that the earlier iteration was wrong. It means the second could be wrong as well. We need to get to something way better. I think the fact that we can talk about these things now, it used to be very difficult for the ANC, while the ANC retained legitimacy by that. But the decline of legitimacy has also allowed and opened the party up for these criticisms. I think they can shape policy better.
Yeah, well, that could be a really exciting development. My last question is really about where the new generation of leadership is going to come from. I mean, it's really interesting if you think about it, a certain period during apartheid, you had tremendously strong leadership. If you think of Mandela's Youth League and the people around him, these were people of exceptional ability. And there were others in other anti-apartheid forces who were very, very talented. And yet right now in politics, you don't see a lot of talent, frankly. I see in your book, you start looking at this question and you refer to, we all see talented South Africans all over the show, just we don't see them in the top levels of politics. And you refer to, for instance, the New Nation movement. And I also noticed that with interest, that there are these civil society formations that may be the embryo for some new formation that will come into focus and start taking on the political sphere in the near future. What do you think?
I mean, John, we're a conservative society, John. Don't forget us. Across race, John, we are conservative. South Africans are generally a conservative society. So that is just red flag for young leaders to start with in a society such as this. Sure. I mean, I did the mathematics. The average age of a leader of a political party, John, is somewhere else at 60. That's fine, that average across the world. But I do think that the youth is overwhelmed by the mainstream politics, which is not paying special attention to the youth. I also think as well, John, let's give it time for young people to find ways in which they can identify new political projects. At this point, the existing youth political project has been infiltrated by the ANC, and the EFF, in my view, is just a franchise of the ANC. So, I mean, when I listen to them calling themselves young people, I don't feel I'm listening to innovative policy proposals. I mean, the problems of land were in 1910. Should the solution almost mirror exactly how the problem has happened by then? And when I'm listening to young people, I want innovative ideas. I don't feel I am listening to that. So let that center that has been dominated by the conservative ANC as well find its way, and I think the youth will find their way as time goes by to define. They might start outside politics, they're getting there.
That's a good note to end on, Ralph. Thank you so much for doing the interview. The book is The ANC's Last Decade, How the Decline of the Party Will Transform South Africa, and we'll be right back. And we're back. My next guest is Professor Susan Booysen. She's a prolific author. She's a professor at Wits, but she also is the director of research at MISTRA. Susan, welcome.
Good morning, John, and thank you for the invitation.
Susan, first, just tell us what MISTRA is.
Well, MISTRA, that is the Mapungubwe Institute for Strategic Reflection, an independent think tank. And at MISTRA, I am the director of research, and it is in my capacity there. It's one of our main intellectual products, from time to time to produce an edited volume in which we pull together a range of, I believe, quite impressive researchers and authors to contribute and analyze a theme of contemporary, current concern, importance.
Okay.
And that is how we got to the topic.
Now you also published another book this year, Precarious Power, which we'll come back to. But your current book is through Mistra is Marriages of Inconvenience: The Politics of Coalitions in South Africa. Why inconvenience?
Oh, it is such a chafing, essential political practice when coalitions come together, when they become the norm for government. It is when one political party no longer gets the overall outright majority mandate from the electorate. And then it becomes essential that political parties come together and together constitute that outright majority in order
Yes,
to
but
govern.
you're saying they're not conveniently doing it. They're inconvenience. And I mean, frankly, we expect a lot more coalitions after the local government elections on November the 1st. But you're saying they're problematic.
Oh, very much so, John. Political parties in South Africa simply have not adopted the culture that we see in many places around the world. And by the way, the majority of parliamentary democracies in the world have coalition governments. Many of them are unstable, uneven, and disruptive, but many of them have an ingrained practice acceptance that it's a set of political parties that have to govern together. But here in South Africa too, we are in a way struggling to unbundle that practice of one-party dominance. And while the ANC hovers there on the edge of, yes, it can recover, yes, it can resuscitate itself, or no, it's falling way below 50%, even if it remains probably the biggest political party. We still have to get in South Africa that culture of political parties governing together, accepting that they've only got partial and shared mandates from the electorate, and therefore have to form a stable coalition government. But in South Africa, the big thorn in the flesh is that political parties are immensely competitive, and they do not want to put elections behind them once those elections are done, and none of them got an outright majority.
So some countries manage their coalition less inconveniently. In Africa, I think Botswana and Mauritius have done a reasonably good job. And of course, it's an interesting time. We're now watching in Germany, where they expect to take 3 months to put their coalition together.
Yes, indeed. Political parties can actually engender a very stable practice when they get into the habit of negotiating very thorough coalition agreements, when they have enough time to do that. As we know, in Germany and several other places, it can take a prolonged period to get together. And then they also really need to have a commitment to those coalition agreements when there are, for example, mechanisms built in to resolve conflicts, when there's open communication between the different leaderships of the different parties coming together. And it can be a very stable practice. And it's very important that those coalitions tend to hang together much better if the political parties are internally coherent, not deeply divided or fractional, as we often have in South Africa. And it's been influenced South Africa, both in ANC and DA. But when political parties can overcome that and they can put a huge amount of trust in their coalition partners, even if they know it's only going to be for a limited period of time. Very few parties that are in coalitions, governing coalitions, actually continue and merge and fuse and become a new political entity. So political parties have to accept that that is a practice, an instrument for government, really, that will endure for a limited period of time. And once that is there, and there are thorough negotiations, then those coalitions really have a chance to deliver stable government. And very often stable government means that government projects, delivery aspect dimensions can be seen through. But in South Africa, that is still an inconvenient situation because parties go for their own interests in the first place.
From reading your book, which you were the editor of, so there are other authors as well, I mean, it seems that there are very unstable coalitions in South Africa. They're not about policy as much about power and personality.
Oh, and that is overwhelmingly the case. There have been small enclaves of policy advances. The EFF, for example, when it was in a power brokering seat, holding balance of power in Nelson Mandela Bay, then it bargained on specific policy aspects, bringing workers on board permanently instead of part-time practices or specific delivery in particular communities. So those as enclaves of policy dedication is there, but generally policy is a far second cry for these coalitions. And rather it is political power play and political parties trying to establish themselves in the dominant positions and just co-opting here and there on other parties. And then we have seen very odd political alliances too in South Africa, and those have been unstable, as we know in several other metros where the DA and the EFF got together. And that was really in a time when Jacob Zuma was still in power in South Africa. And it was a united front against Zuma, and the EFF really wanted to hurt the ANC for hanging on to their former president at that stage. But when Zuma went and Ramaphosa came in, that glue that held together the EFF and the DA, that fell apart. And so did those coalitions. And the EFF in several of these coalitions, as the UDM, for example, in Nelson Mandela Bay, their votes were essential to build majorities, but they really bartered positions, access to patronage, etc. And it became a very unsound, inconvenient basis of government.
In other words, it's really about patronage, in other words, getting positions for yourself and your mates, and rent seeking, in other words, getting contracts and tenders and skimming some money off the top for yourselves and your friends.
Indeed, and unfortunately, John, yes, those are the prime motivations so far in coalition politics in South Africa. And through this book, we at MISTRA exactly want to bring attention to what are these facts, what are the current political practices, the political culture, the unfortunate political culture surrounding coalition governments, so people can learn from the mistakes, and hopefully in a small way we can contribute to getting government that is more focused on people and on the mandates that the people had given.
I see you, even one of your authors uses the word ungovernability, that you actually, coalitions have actually in some cases become ungovernable.
Oh, absolutely. Because it's this roller coaster of changing alliances and changing seats and motions of no confidence being brought and council meetings being disrupted continuously, government not taking place, provincial government then being asked and in a way required to step in, but then that's kind of stepping in also being abused by political parties, in order to thwart a new alliance taking shape in that municipality. And in cases like Tshwane, for example, that has been a huge problem.
I mean, this is so frustrating. What do you think it'll take we only have 90 seconds left before we break, but what would it take for South Africa's coalitions to become workable?
You know, really a sense of responsibility from political parties. One of the main drivers, if not the main driver, in instability in this form of government is that party political culture of putting party politics foremost instead of looking at what is the mandate that's that the different parties in a particular locality, such as a municipality, receive from the electorate, and governing according to that. Of course, there are many other aspects. Also, there can be legislative reform, there can be adoption simply of a municipal system of executive system of proportionality instead of a mayoral executive committee, which favors the consolidation and centralization of power in the mayor, instead of in the range of political parties, perhaps in the proportion to which they are represented in the council. That could be a great stabilizing factor and something which is legally an instrument that is legally available in South Africa.
We're going to take a break, Susan. When we come back, I'm going to ask you about the kind of party splits that we have in South Africa, which seem to lead to a sort of come from a sort of syndrome of the big man or big woman leader. But we have to take a break. We'll be right back with Professor Susan Booysen. And we're back with Professor Susan Booysen, looking at her new book, her latest book, Marriages of Inconvenience, The Politics of Coalitions in South Africa, something we're going to see a lot of in the coming months. I noticed that the kind of party splits we have in South Africa, often from the ANC, but even from Inkatha as well and others, it's often because the person doesn't get the leadership role and they won't accept that. So it's not about policy, it's not a deep division about principle. It's just a clash that I should be in charge, and now I'm going to start my own party so I can still be in charge.
Yes, indeed, John. That is a huge part of political culture in South Africa. And it's also interesting that the ANC, given its precarious majorities that it nowadays maintains, are very aware that should it experience further splits like we had way back with the United Democratic Movement, then the Congress of the People, and economic freedom fighters, each one of those had taken away a portion of the ANC support, which gradually parts of it returned to the ANC in due course, but mostly went into the party political diaspora of small parties and independents here and there, and huge level of realignment on that front. But the ANC realizes that should it experience another one of those splits, it won't be able to maintain that outright majority that it has nationally in most of the provinces and in many, many other municipalities of South Africa. And so it knows that it had better keep that glue going and that it has to find a way to cooperate. And that is actually what we're seeing in the ANC at the moment. They cannot split, but they cannot live together in any great or significant degree of harmony. And that has many adverse effects in other respects. But it really is a big political culture in South Africa. Big men that try to find new purchase from which they can have some kind of influence.
In Germany, apparently they're taking the current 3 months, just when the election was held this week. They're going to take 3 months because they write a very detailed agreement between the parties on policy. Do we do that, or is there room to elaborate on that kind of process?
That's one of our strong recommendations in this MISTRA book. And that is for sufficient time to bring together these coalitions. We know that political parties in South Africa, after the constitution, after the announcement of the results of municipal elections, local government elections, they have about 2 weeks in which, from the moment of announcement of results to having to constitute a municipal government, or at least having shown that they try to convene a meeting at which the positions like the mayor and the speaker would be elected. So basically they're given 2 weeks to do that, which could be way too short. But then also, given the regularity with which political parties in South Africa have been changing their positions in coalitions, which ones they adhere to, It may not actually even, we can say there's such lawlessness in South African party politics that it might not even make a difference to give political parties more time. But there needs to be the opportunity, and in many cases, that will be justified to extend that period for political parties to find stable coalition partners. But there would have to be the acceptance then also by political parties that this is a stable, committed relationship, a marriage of a type that they will be entering into with a high level of commitment, not with the idea just to let it last until the next high position is offered to a micro political party, for example, or to a political party that holds the balance of power, but that they have bigger concerns. Again, a plea for the concerns of the electorate, to have those in mind and to commit to a stable relationship.
How common is it? It seems like, at least in your book, I see at least some of the parties enter into these coalitions in bad faith. How common is that they don't really make their predominant interest in making the city or the town that they're in govern effectively and deliver services for the next 5 years?
John, that is extremely common. The political parties really go for which are the bigger parties that can be the leading party in a coalition government at local level, offers them the best position, whether they can use that, their positionality and their roles in these municipalities to further the higher party political ambitions, to profile the party, to give propaganda, publicity to the party, to make the party look good, to make a national, we find often they make national party policy or national policy stands by taking certain positions in local councils. And it is a game of party politics, it's a game of thrones in a way, that political parties use every opportunity, also precarious positions, power holding positions, power brokering positions in municipalities, in order to profile themselves for benefit of national politics and national profile, for example. So it's in many respects a free for all.
Yes. Now, it seems to me there's sort of two stages to this. When they're negotiating and setting up the coalition, it's about patronage, who gets the positions, and obviously that may continue a little bit afterwards. But the other issue that then comes into play once they've got the positions is rent seeking, in other words, getting the contracts. How common is it that people go into these coalitions and with hindsight you can see the plan always was to get the contracts and the tenders and to skim off from the top of those?
It is quite common, John. It's obviously the type of information that one doesn't always readily have access to. But
Right.
from interviews that several of the authors have done, it is clear that it is politicians seeking benefits for their own political parties, and not just in the profile sense of the word, but often also in which contract they can get, which municipal portfolio. In this case, we were talking about local government, can they get control over, and perhaps not even get the contracts there, but use a powerful position and control of certain portfolios at municipal level then to barter influence with outside agencies. Somebody gets a contract, maybe that contract is quite legal, but the fact that this party had been instrumental in ensuring that that contract goes to a particular business enterprise could help bring them extract rent then outside of municipal domain from agencies like that. So it's common.
And is law enforcement making any progress with the National Prosecuting Authority and so on in getting to these local government malfeasances?
There are small enclaves of progress in these, but
Okay.
generally it is so widespread. It is actually such a common part of local government. It's why municipal councillors, candidates get killed sometimes in order for others to want to access those positions. I think the investigating authorities have only skimmed the surface.
Now, I want to link this book with the last book, Precarious Power, because in Precarious Power, you argued that President Ramaphosa appears to understand the dysfunction of government at every level. And so he's forming a sort of parallel government. And the parallel government applies at local level as well through these district councils. How will that be affected by coalitions?
Yes, John, maybe there's good news of some sort in the district development model, and that Ramaphosa is promoting, and that he also referred to in the ANC's launch of its election campaign. And district development model is now directly elected. It is exactly as you say there, that alternative parallel form of government. And it is significant here because even if there are some legal anchors that it can be justified, it is definitely not the form of government that is being elected. And isn't it elected a government with accountability that should be brought into this picture?
But should we not see that as a benefit? If you're a citizen at a local government level, you want services, will this make services less dependent on these municipal councils?
It will make them less depending on municipal councils for sure. And that is probably the positive aspect we can see in it. But then we know it is not just the councillors and the politicians that can act with great levels of improbity. Officials and bureaucrats in many cases can as well. But yes, it is a severe indictment for South African political system of representative institutions like municipal councils, that they cannot be trusted to bring accountability, and there has to be the reliance by government on those kinds of forms.
We're out of time, but I mean that is also a less democratic system.
Absolutely, and that affects the pillars of our democracy. It is a tall order to fix local government, but I would like to see much more effort, dedication by government, national government, and the president to fix local government and not to find other ways to govern around what is essentially a failed system.
Susan Booysen, thanks very much for being on the forum. The book is Marriages of Inconvenience, The Politics of Coalitions in South Africa. Just time for me to thank you for watching. See you next week.